The sky above Viridian Prime burned orange and red. Smoke rose from what used to be buildings, homes, and markets. The ground shook as distant explosions echoed through the ruins. Sergeant Jake Morrison moved carefully through the destroyed streets, his rifle ready, his eyes scanning every shadow. Behind him, 5 soldiers followed in tight formation. They had orders to search this sector for survivors and get out fast. The Krythax were coming back, and nobody wanted to be here when they did. Jake hated this part of war. Fighting enemies was one thing. Walking through the aftermath, seeing what orbital bombardment did to innocent people, was something else entirely. This wasn't a military base they were searching. This was a residential area where families had lived just days ago. Now it was rubble and ash. "Sergeant, we need to move," Corporal Danny Hayes said from behind him. "Command says we have 20 minutes before the next wave hits." Jake nodded but didn't speed up. 20 minutes was enough time to check thoroughly. If someone was alive under this debris, he wasn't going to leave them because of a ticking clock. His squad knew him well enough not to argue. They'd follow him into hell if he asked, and right now hell didn't seem far away. They passed the remains of what looked like a market square. Stalls that once sold food and goods were now twisted metal frames. Jake's chest tightened. He thought about the people who worked here, who shopped here, who laughed here. All gone now. The Krythax didn't care about civilians. To them, Viridian Prime was just another world to crush on their way to controlling this sector. "Got movement, northwest corner," Private Linda Martinez called out softly. Everyone froze, weapons coming up. Jake moved forward slowly, using hand signals to direct his team to spread out and cover him. Movement could mean a lot of things. Could be a wounded civilian, could be a Krythax scout, could be nothing but debris settling. He rounded a collapsed wall and saw it, a small hand, pale purple in color, sticking out from under a pile of broken concrete and twisted metal. The hand moved weakly, fingers grasping at air. Jake's heart jumped. "Civilian down," he called back. "Child, I need help here now." His squad rushed over. The little hand belonged to a silvery child, maybe 7 or 8 years old by human standards. Her face was barely visible, covered in dust and blood. One of her eyes was swollen shut, but the other eye, bright violet like all Silvari, looked up at Jake with pure terror. Jake knelt down, setting his rifle aside. "Hey there," he said softly, keeping his voice calm despite the situation. "We're here to help." "Can you understand me?" The girl's violet eye blinked. "Help," she whispered in broken human standard. "Please help." "We will," Jake promised. "What's your name?" "Lyrian," the child said, her voice so quiet he could barely hear it. Danny and Linda started carefully removing debris while Jake kept talking to Lyrian, trying to keep her calm. She was pinned from the waist down under a heavy concrete slab. If they moved it wrong, it could crush her completely. If they didn't move it at all, she'd die here when the Krythax returned. "Lyrian, that's a beautiful name," Jake said, holding her small hand. "I'm Jake. We're going to get you out of here, okay? It might hurt a little, but I need you to be brave." Lyrian's eye filled with tears. "Mama," she whispered. "Papa, where?" Jake's throat tightened. He looked around at the destruction. The chances that her parents survived this bombardment were almost zero, but he couldn't tell her that. "Not now. We'll look for them," he lied gently. "First, we need to get you safe. Can you do that for me? Can you be brave?" Lyrian nodded slightly. Jake admired that. Here was a child who had just lost everything, trapped under rubble, terrified out of her mind, and she was still trying to be brave because a stranger asked her to. That took strength most adults didn't have. "Sergeant, we've got a problem," Danny said quietly. "This slab is weight-bearing. If we move it, the whole section might come down. Then we work fast," Jake said. "On 3, we lift and I pull her out. Everyone ready?" His team positioned themselves around the slab. Jake moved closer to Lyrian, ready to grab her the moment there was space. The girl watched him with that one violet eye, trusting him completely. That trust weighed heavier than any weapon he'd ever carried. 1, 2, 3, Jake counted. The soldiers lifted with everything they had. Metal groaned. Concrete shifted. Jake grabbed Lyrian under her arms and pulled. The girl screamed in pain as her crushed legs came free. Behind them, the entire section of wall began to collapse. Jake rolled with Lyrian in his arms, covering her body with his as debris rained down around them. When the dust settled, they were clear. Jake checked Lyrian quickly. Both her legs were badly injured, possibly broken. She needed medical attention immediately. But she was alive. "We need to move now," Linda said urgently. "That collapse will draw attention. Jake stood, cradling Lyrian carefully in his arms. She was so light, weighing almost nothing. She buried her face against his chest, sobbing quietly. He started running, his squad forming a protective circle around them. The evacuation shuttle was parked 3 blocks away. It felt like 3 miles. Jake's legs burned. His arms ached. Lyrian's blood soaked into his uniform. Behind them, the sound of Krythak's aircraft grew louder. They weren't going to make it, he knew it. But he kept running anyway. Laser fire cracked overhead. The Krythaks had spotted them. Jake's squad returned fire without breaking stride. Danny took a hit to his shoulder but kept moving. Linda provided covering fire while the others pushed forward. The shuttle was right there, ramped down, engines hot. Go, 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 Jake shouted. They piled into the shuttle. The pilot didn't wait for everyone to sit down before taking off. The ship lurched into the air just as a Krythak strike team reached their position. More laser fire rattled against the hull, but they were already too high, too fast. Inside the shuttle, Jake finally sat down, still holding Lyrian. A medic rushed over and started treating her legs. The girl whimpered but didn't let go of Jake's uniform. He held her gently, murmuring reassurances he wasn't sure she could hear over the engine noise. "You're safe now," he told her. "I've got you." At the refugee station, they tried to separate them immediately. Lyrian panicked, crying out and reaching for Jake. He stayed with her until the doctors took her into surgery, promising he'd check on her later. Before they wheeled her away, Jake unpinned his unit patch from his shoulder and pressed it into her small hand. "You keep this," he said. "And you stay strong, Lyrian. You're braver than most soldiers I know." Lyrian clutched the patch like it was the most valuable thing in the universe. "Thank you, Jake," she whispered. Then they took her away, and Jake had to return to his unit. He never saw the little Sylvari girl again. Within hours, he was back on the front lines, fighting a war that seemed like it would never end. But he carried her. 12 years had passed since Viridian Prime. Jake Morrison stood at the observation window of Haven Point Orbital Station, watching ships come and go from the docking bays below. He wore the clean uniform of a lieutenant now, not the combat gear he'd worn for so many years. The war with the Krythak's empire had ended 5 years ago, replaced by an uneasy peace that still felt fragile to those who remembered the fighting. Haven Point was built as a symbol of that peace. The massive station orbited a neutral world, serving as a meeting place for the United Galactic Council. Humans, Sylvari, Krythaks, and a dozen other species worked here together, trying to build something better than the hatred that had nearly destroyed them all. Jake served as a military liaison, helping coordinate security and training exercises between different species forces. It was important work, but sometimes he missed the simplicity of his old life, where enemies and friends were easy to identify. "Lieutenant Morrison, you're needed in Conference Room 7, a voice said through his communicator. "The Sylvari delegation has arrived for the summit." Jake sighed and headed toward the conference level. Another delegation, another summit, another chance for old grudges to boil over into new conflicts. He'd sat through hundreds of these meetings over the past 5 years. Most went smoothly, some didn't. His job was to make sure the ones that didn't go smoothly didn't end in violence. The conference room was already filling with people when he arrived. Human diplomats in their formal suits stood on one side, talking quietly among themselves. Across from them, the Sylvari delegation had just entered. Jake barely glanced at them. He'd worked with dozens of Sylvari diplomats over the years. They were professional, polite, and usually easier to work with than some of the human politicians. He took his position near the back of the room, ready to handle any security concerns. The summit was scheduled to last 3 days, discussing trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. Boring stuff, but necessary. Wars started when people stopped talking to each other. The Sylvari delegation began introducing themselves to the human representatives. Jake watched out of habit, noting faces and body language. Most of the Sylvari were middle-aged or older, experienced diplomats who'd done this dance many times before. But one stood out. A young woman, maybe 20 years old, with the silver hair and violet eyes characteristic of her species. She wore formal diplomatic robes but carried herself with a mixture of confidence and nervousness that suggested this might be one of her first major assignments. Something about her made Jake pause. He couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the way she held herself, or the intensity in her violet eyes as she scanned the room. She seemed to be looking for something, or someone. Their eyes met across the crowded room. Jake felt a jolt of recognition that made no sense. He'd never seen this woman before. He was certain of it, yet something in his memory stirred, like a half-remembered dream trying to surface. The young Silvari woman's expression changed. Her eyes widened. Her hand went to a pocket in her robes, clutching something Jake couldn't see. She said something quickly to the older diplomat beside her, then began moving through the crowd toward Jake. Jake stayed where he was, confused but curious. As she got closer, he could see her hands trembling slightly. This wasn't normal diplomatic behavior. Something was happening here, something outside the usual script. "Lieutenant Morrison," she said when she reached him. Her voice was soft but clear, speaking human standard with barely any accent. "May I speak with you privately for a moment?" Jake hesitated. Protocol said he should stay in the conference room during the opening session, but the look in her eyes wasn't threatening. It was hopeful, nervous, and something else he couldn't quite identify. "Of course," he said. "There's a smaller room just outside." They stepped into an empty meeting room. The young woman closed the door behind them, then turned to face Jake. Her hand was still clutching something in her pocket. She seemed to be gathering courage for something. "You don't remember me," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm sorry," Jake replied honestly. "Have we met before?" "I've worked with many Silvari delegations, but I don't recall." "We met 12 years ago," she interrupted gently. "On Viridian Prime, during the bombardment." Jake's heart stopped. Viridian Prime. The name brought back memories he'd tried hard to bury. The burning city. The desperate evacuation runs. The civilians he'd saved. The ones he couldn't save. And one in particular, a little girl trapped under rubble. Violet eyes looking up at him with terror and trust. "Lyrian," he whispered. The young woman's face broke into a trembling smile. Tears filled her violet eyes. "You remember? I gave you my unit patch," Jake said, the memory flooding back now. "Before they took you to surgery. I told you to stay strong." Lyrian reached into her pocket and pulled out a small faded piece of cloth. Jake's unit patch, worn and stained with age but carefully preserved. She'd kept it for 12 years. "You saved my life," Lyrian said, her voice thick with emotion. "You pulled me from the rubble when you should have left me. You carried me through enemy fire. You stayed with me when I was terrified. And you gave me this to hold on to when I had nothing else left." Jake couldn't speak. The little girl he'd carried through hell had grown into this poised young woman standing before him. He'd wondered about her over the years, hoped she'd survived but never expected to see her again. The odds of their paths crossing again were astronomical. "I thought about you so many times," he finally managed to say. "Wondered if you made it. If you were okay. I tried to find out what happened to you, but the refugee systems were chaos back then. I was sent to a camp on Delta Station," Lyrian said. "Lived there for 4 years. Then I was placed with a foster family on Earth. They were good to me, helped me learn human languages and customs. I studied hard, became a translator, then joined the diplomatic corps. I kept hoping that somehow, someday I'd find you. I wanted to tell you what your kindness meant to a frightened child who'd lost everything." Jake felt his throat tighten. He'd saved dozens of people during the war. It was his job. He'd never thought much about the impact it had on their lives afterward. But looking at Lyrian now, seeing what she'd become, he realized that single decision to dig her out of that rubble had changed the entire course of her existence. "You don't need to thank me," he said quietly. "Any soldier would have done the same." "No," Lyrian said firmly. "Not any soldier. Some would have followed orders and evacuated. Some would have considered one Silvari child not worth the risk. But you didn't. You saw someone who needed help and you helped. That's not just being a good soldier. That's being a good person." They talked for nearly an hour, sharing the stories of the years they'd spent apart. Lyrian told him about the refugee camps, about learning to live with the loss of her family, about the nightmares that still woke her some nights. But she also told him about the moments of hope, about the humans who showed her kindness, about deciding to dedicate her life to preventing other children from experiencing what she had. Jake told her about the battles that followed Viridian Prime, about friends he'd lost, about the day the war finally ended and the strange emptiness that came with peace. He told her about the guilt he sometimes felt, wondering if saving one life made up for all the lives he'd taken as a soldier. "It does," Lyrian said softly. "You gave me a future. That matters. When they finally returned to the conference room, the opening session had ended. Other diplomats looked at them curiously, wondering what had kept a junior ambassador and a military liaison locked in conversation for so long. Neither Jake nor Lyrian explained. Some things were too personal to share with strangers. Over the next few days, they found reasons to talk more. Coffee between sessions, walks along the station's observation deck, late-night conversations about politics, philosophy, and the nature of peace. Jake felt a connection to Lyrian that went deeper than friendship, though he couldn't quite define it. She'd been a child he saved. Now she was a colleague. But somewhere in between, she'd become something more important. A reminder that even in war's darkest moments, hope survived. Lyrian felt it too. Jake represented everything she believed about humanity's potential for goodness. In a galaxy still scarred by hatred and violence, he was proof that individual choices mattered, that compassion could exist even in war, that the future didn't have to repeat the past. Neither of them knew it yet, but their reunion was about to become much. The grand reception hall on Haven Point's top level gleamed with lights and possibilities. Diplomats from a dozen worlds mingled beneath a transparent ceiling that showed the stars beyond. Jake stood near a refreshment table, wearing his dress uniform and wishing he was anywhere else. These formal events always felt awkward to him. Too much small talk, too many fake smiles, too much politics disguised as pleasantries. Try to look less like you're attending your own funeral, Colonel Lisa Martinez said, appearing beside him with 2 glasses of something blue and sparkling. She'd been his commanding officer for the past 3 years and knew him well enough to spot his discomfort from across the room. "I'm fine," Jake lied, accepting one of the glasses without drinking from it. "You're terrible at these things," Lisa said with a smile. "But they're important. Half of maintaining peace is just showing up and being seen. Makes everyone feel safer when they see military personnel from different sides drinking together, instead of shooting at each other." Jake nodded. He understood the reasoning. Didn't mean he had to enjoy it. His eyes drifted across the crowd, automatically cataloging potential security concerns out of habit. Most of the guests were exactly what they appeared to be. Tired diplomats trying to prevent the next war. A few were probably intelligence officers doing the same thing he was, watching and noting who talked to whom. Then he saw her. Lyrian stood with the Silvari delegation on the far side of the hall, wearing formal robes that shimmered silver in the light. She was listening intently to an older human diplomat, nodding at something he said. Even from this distance, Jake could see the intelligence in her eyes, the careful way she processed information before responding. They'd been meeting regularly since that first day, always finding excuses to cross paths. Coffee breaks that lasted too long, walks that stretched for hours, conversations that started about work and ended up somewhere far more personal. Jake had told himself it was just friendship, 2 people bonded by shared history. But watching her now, he felt something tighten in his chest that had nothing to do with friendship. "That's her, isn't it?" Lisa asked quietly. "The girl you saved on Viridian Prime." Jake glanced at his colonel. "How did you know about that?" "I make it my business to know things," Lisa said. "Also, you're not as subtle as you think. Everyone's noticed you 2 spending time together. Some people think it's sweet. Others are concerned." "Concerned about what?" Jake asked, though he could guess the answer. "About how it looks. A human soldier and a Silvari diplomat getting close during sensitive peace negotiations. Some people worry about conflicts of interest. Others just don't like seeing humans and aliens forming personal relationships." Lisa's expression was neutral, but her tone suggested she didn't share those concerns. "Just be careful, Jake. Not everyone here wants peace as much as they claim." Before Jake could respond, something shifted in the room's energy. Voices dropped. People turned to look. Jake followed their gaze and saw a tall Silvari man in elaborate robes making his way toward Lyrian. Ambassador Kelrin Thrace, one of the more hardline members of the Silvari delegation. Jake had read his file. Thrace had lost family in the war and made no secret of his distrust toward humans. Thrace spoke to Lyrian in their own language, his tone sharp. Lyrian responded calmly but firmly. Their conversation drew attention from nearby diplomats. Jake couldn't understand the words, but body language told the story clearly enough. Thrace was displeased about something, and Lyrian was standing her ground. Jake started moving toward them without thinking. Lisa caught his arm. "Don't," she warned. "Whatever's happening there, you getting involved will only make it worse." "He looks angry," Jake said. He's always angry. Let Lyrian handle it. She's a trained diplomat. She doesn't need rescuing. Lisa's grip tightened slightly. Not every problem requires a soldier's solution. Jake forced himself to stop, though every instinct told him to intervene. Lisa was right. Lyrian wasn't a scared child anymore. She could handle herself. But it went against his nature to stand by when someone he cared about might be in trouble. The confrontation ended when an older Sylvari woman, presumably senior to both Lyrian and Thrace, stepped in and said something that made the ambassador walk away stiffly. Lyrian remained calm on the outside, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. She excused herself from the group and headed toward one of the side exits. Jake waited exactly 30 seconds, then followed. He found her on an observation deck, staring out at the stars with her arms wrapped around herself. "Want to talk about it?" he asked quietly. Lyrian turned, and he saw the frustration in her violet eyes. "Ambassador Thrace believes I'm spending too much time with humans. Specifically with you. He thinks I've forgotten who I am and where I come from. Have you?" Jake asked. "No," Lyrian said firmly. "I know exactly who I am. I'm someone who survived because a human soldier valued my life enough to risk his own. I'm someone who was shown kindness by humans when I had nothing. I'm someone who believes we can be better than our worst moments." She paused. "But Thrace isn't wrong about everything. There are Silvari who still hate humans for what happened during the war. Just like there are humans who still hate my people. Our friendship makes some of them uncomfortable. Does that bother you?" Jake asked. Lyrian was quiet for a moment. "It bothers me that we're still so divided. That 12 years after you saved me, people like Thrace can't see past species differences. That some humans look at me and see an enemy instead of a person." She looked at Jake directly. "Does it bother you? That people are talking about us?" "No," Jake said honestly. "People will always find something to talk about. What matters is whether we let that change how we act." "You sound very sure about that." "I am sure. You know why?" Jake moved to stand beside her at the window. "Because 12 years ago I had a choice. I could follow orders and evacuate, or I could dig a Silvari child out of rubble and risk my life and my squad's lives to save her. The logical choice was to leave you. The safe choice. The choice that followed protocol. But I didn't make that choice, and I've never regretted it." Lyrian smiled slightly. "You're saying we should ignore what others think?" "I'm saying we should do what we believe is right and let others think whatever they want." Jake gestured out at the stars. "The universe is bigger than anyone's prejudices. If we let fear and hatred dictate our choices, we're just repeating the same mistakes that led to the war in the first place." "That's very philosophical for a soldier," Lyrian teased gently. "I've had a lot of time to think since the war ended," Jake said. "Most of it alone, wondering if anything I did mattered. Then you walked back into my life and I realized it did matter. Every choice matters. Every life saved is a victory against all the darkness in the universe." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching ships move between the docking bays below. The station's rotation slowly brought a blue-green planet into view, peaceful and untouched by war. "Can I tell you something?" Lyrian asked quietly. "Something I haven't told anyone else?" "Of course. When I was in the refugee camps, I used to have nightmares. Every night I'd dream about being trapped under the rubble again, unable to breathe, certain I was going to die." She touched the pocket where she kept Jake's old unit patch. "The only thing that helped was remembering your face. Remembering that you came back for me. That someone cared enough to save me. I'd hold this patch and tell myself that if one person could show that much kindness in the middle of war, maybe the universe wasn't completely dark." Jake felt his throat tighten. "Lyrian, let me finish," she said softly. "You gave me more than my life that day. You gave me hope. You gave me proof that different species could care about each other, even when their governments were at war. Everything I've done since then, every choice I've made, has been trying to honor that gift. I became a diplomat because I wanted to prevent other children from needing rescue. I learned human languages and customs because I wanted to build bridges between our peoples. I searched for you because I needed you to know that your choice mattered." "It wasn't a choice," Jake said. "When I saw you trapped there was no choice. I couldn't leave you." "Exactly," Lyrian said, turning to face him fully. "That's what makes you special. That's what makes humans special. You don't save people because it's logical or strategic. You save them because you can't do otherwise. Because compassion is stronger than fear." She reached out and took his hand. "Ambassador Thrace is wrong. My friendship with you doesn't make me forget who I am. It reminds me of who I want to be. Jake squeezed her hand gently. Then we keep going. Together. Whatever comes. Whatever comes, Lyrian agreed. They didn't know it yet, but forces were already in motion that would test that promise sooner than either of them expected. Inside the station, extremists from both species were planning something that could shatter. The coffee shop on Haven Point's residential level was quiet at this early hour. Jake sat across from Lyrian, both nursing cups of something that passed for coffee on a space station. 3 days into the summit, and the political tensions were only getting worse. Yesterday's session had nearly ended in a shouting match between human and Silvari representatives over resource rights in disputed territories. Your ambassador seemed particularly angry yesterday, Jake observed, watching Lyrian carefully. She looked tired, probably not sleeping well with all the stress. Thrace isn't really angry, Lyrian said. He's scared. He lost his whole family during the war. 3 children, his wife, his parents, all killed in a human bombing raid. When he looks at humans, all he sees is that loss. Jake felt a pang of sympathy despite himself. I understand that. I've lost people too. Most soldiers have. But we can't build a future on revenge. Try telling that to someone whose children are dead, Lyrian said quietly. Logic doesn't help when grief is that deep. Thrace knows peace is necessary. He supports it with his mind, but his heart is still fighting the war. Are there many like him in your delegation? Jake asked. Enough to cause problems if they want to. Lyrian sipped her coffee, making a face at the taste. There are also humans in your delegation who lost family, who look at me and my people and remember only the bad things. This peace we're trying to build is fragile because both sides are full of wounded people, trying not to start bleeding again. Jake thought about that. He'd been so focused on the practical aspects of maintaining security that he hadn't considered the emotional weight everyone was carrying. Every person in the station had lived through the war. Everyone had scars. Some were just better at hiding them. What about you, he asked. Do you ever resent humans for what happened to your family? Lyrian was quiet for a long moment. I did at first. When I woke up in the refugee camp and learned my parents were dead, I hated everyone. Humans for bombing us. Silvari for not protecting us. The universe for allowing it to happen. But hatred is exhausting, Jake. You can't carry it forever without it destroying you. What changed? I remembered you, she said simply. Every time the hatred started to win, I'd think about the human soldier who pulled me from the rubble, who risked everything for a child from a species he was at war with. That memory was stronger than the hate. It gave me something else to hold on to. Jake didn't know what to say to that. The weight of being someone's reason for hope felt heavier than any weapon he'd carried. Their conversation was interrupted by Jake's communicator buzzing urgently. He checked it and frowned. Security alert. I need to go. What happened? Someone tried to access restricted files on the station network. Military intelligence databases, diplomatic communications, security protocols. Jake stood quickly. Could be nothing. Could be a spy. Either way, I need to handle it. I'll come with you, Lyrian said, standing as well. This is human military business, Jake said. You don't need to be involved. If someone is trying to undermine this summit, it affects everyone, Lyrian replied firmly. Besides, if it involves Silvari files too, you might need a translator. Jake wanted to argue but didn't have time. They headed to the security office together, where Colonel Martinez was already reviewing reports with her team. What do we know? Jake asked. Someone used a stolen access code to try downloading secure files, Lisa explained. Military deployment records, names of intelligence officers, details about security measures for the summit. They got caught by our monitoring systems and shut down, but not before accessing some information. Who was it? Lyrian asked. Lisa glanced at her, clearly not happy about having a Silvari diplomat in the security office, but recognized that Lyrian wasn't leaving. We traced the access point to Terminal 47 in the diplomatic wing. The user identification was scrambled, but preliminary analysis suggests it might have been a Silvari account. Jake saw Lyrian stiffen. You're saying someone from my delegation is a spy? I'm saying someone used a Silvari diplomatic credential to access restricted information, Lisa corrected. Whether that was actually a member of your delegation or someone who stole those credentials, we don't know yet. I want to see the access logs, Lyrian said. That's classified, Lisa said flatly. Someone is trying to sabotage this summit and frame my people for it, Lyrian said, her voice cold. If there's a traitor in my delegation, I need to know. If someone is trying to make us look guilty, I need to prove it. Either way, I can help. Lisa looked at Jake. He gave a small nod. The colonel sighed and pulled up the logs on a screen. Lyrian studied them carefully, her eyes moving rapidly over the information. This doesn't make sense, she said after a moment. This access code belongs to junior diplomat Nella Voss. She's 23 years old, been with the diplomatic corps for only 2 years. She has no intelligence training and barely understands human computer systems. Maybe she's a better spy than you think, Lisa suggested. Or maybe someone stole her credentials knowing she'd make a perfect scapegoat, Lyrian countered. Nella is young, inexperienced, and easily intimidated. If someone wanted to frame a Silvery for espionage, she'd be the perfect choice. Jake saw where Lyrian was going. We need to find Nella and question her before whoever did this has a chance to silence her. Agreed, Lisa said. Morrison, you and Ambassador Visera go find this Nella person. Bring her here quietly. Don't cause a scene that might alert whoever is behind this. They found Nella in her quarters, packing her belongings with shaking hands. The young Silvery woman looked terrified when they entered. I didn't do anything, she said immediately. I don't know how they accessed my account. I don't even know what files they took. Please, you have to believe me. Lyrian moved forward slowly, keeping her voice gentle. We believe you, Nella, but we need your help. When did you last use your access code? This morning to send a message to my family back home. That's all I use it for. I don't have clearance for classified files. Has anyone asked to borrow your code? Jake asked. Or had access to your terminal? Nella hesitated. Ambassador Thrace asked me to prepare some reports yesterday. He used my terminal while I was getting documents from another office. But he wouldn't, he's an ambassador. He has his own clearances. Jake and Lyrian exchanged glances. How long was he alone with your terminal? Jake asked. Maybe 10 minutes. But he couldn't have done anything wrong. He's one of our most respected diplomats. Thank you, Nella, Lyrian said. Please don't mention this conversation to anyone. For your own safety. Back in the security office, they shared what they'd learned. Lisa pulled up Ambassador Thrace's file and frowned. He has a history of making inflammatory speeches about humans. Opposes several of the peace initiatives being discussed at this summit. But that doesn't make him a spy. What if he's not spying for another government? Lyrian said slowly. What if he's trying to sabotage the summit itself? Make it look like Silvari are stealing military secrets? Create an incident that destroys trust between our peoples? That's a serious accusation, Lisa said. Do you have any proof? Not yet, Lyrian admitted. But I know Thrace. I've watched him throughout this summit. He wants peace to fail. He wants humans and Silvari to stay enemies because that's easier for him than letting go of his grief. Jake pulled up the list of accessed files. These deployment records, security protocols, intelligence officer names. If someone wanted to stage an attack that looked like inside knowledge, this information would tell them exactly how to do it. You think he's planning an attack? Lisa asked sharply. I think someone is, Jake said. And whether it's Thrace or someone using his grief to manipulate him, we need to find out fast. For the next several hours, they worked together. Jake's military intelligence training, Lyrian's knowledge of Silvari culture and politics, and Lisa's security resources combined to piece together a picture that grew more disturbing with each new detail. Encrypted messages between Thrace and unknown contacts. Meetings with human extremists who also opposed the peace process. Financial transfers that didn't match his diplomatic salary. He's not working alone, Lyrian said, staring at the evidence. There are humans involved too. People who want this summit to fail as much as he does. Extremists on both sides working together to destroy peace, Lisa said. That's either the most ironic thing I've ever heard or the most terrifying. Both, Jake said grimly. The question is, what are they planning and when? The answer came sooner than they expected. An alert flashed across the security screens. Someone had just placed an unauthorized device in the main council chamber, where tomorrow's crucial vote on mutual defense pacts was scheduled to take place. Security teams were moving to investigate, but Jake already knew what they would find. The council chamber was supposed to be empty. The vote wasn't scheduled until tomorrow morning. But when Jake, Lyrian, and the security team burst through the doors, they found Ambassador Thrace standing near the main podium with a device in his hands. His violet eyes held no surprise at being discovered, only a terrible calm. Stay back, Thrace said in human standard, his voice steady. This doesn't concern you, Lieutenant Morrison. A bomb in the council chamber concerns everyone, Jake replied, his hand on his weapon but not drawing it yet. Beside him, Lyrian stood frozen, staring at her fellow Sylvari with horror and disbelief. It's not a bomb, Thrace said. Not exactly. It's a pulse device that will disable all electronics in this chamber. Communications, security systems, everything. While this building is blind, our allies will stage an incident in the docking bay. Some ships destroyed, some casualties. Enough to make both sides blame each other and walk away from these peace talks. You're working with human extremists to destroy peace, Lyrian said, finding her voice.
How could you?
How could I? Thrace's calm broke slightly, anger bleeding through. How could I sit in this room and smile at the people who murdered my family? How could I pretend that trade agreements and defense pacts make up for what they took from me? He looked at Jake. Your people killed my children, Lieutenant. Burned them alive in their school. And you want me to shake hands and call that peace? Jake felt the weight of those words. I'm sorry for your loss, truly, but more violence won't bring them back. No, Thrace agreed. But it will prevent others from forgetting what happened. Peace makes people comfortable. It lets them pretend the war never happened, that all those deaths meant nothing. I won't let their sacrifice be forgotten. It won't be forgotten, Lyrian said urgently, taking a step forward despite Jake's warning hand on her arm. We carry those memories every day. Every person in this station lost someone. Every species represented here has grief, but we're trying to make sure it doesn't happen again. That's not forgetting. That's honoring the dead by protecting the living. Naive child, Thrace said, but his voice was sad rather than angry. You were too young when the war ended. You don't understand. This peace is built on convenience, not justice. The moment it becomes inconvenient, they'll start killing us again. Then we make it inconvenient to start killing, Jake said. We build connections between our peoples that are stronger than hatred. We create reasons to choose peace over war. He gestured at Lyrian. 12 years ago, I pulled this woman out of rubble on Viridian Prime. I was a soldier. She was the enemy's child. By every military logic, I should have left her, but I didn't because some things are more important than war. Some choices matter more than orders. One act of kindness doesn't erase genocide, Thrace said. No, Jake agreed, but millions of acts of kindness might prevent the next one. Every person who chooses connection over hatred, every friendship that crosses species lines, every moment someone sees past their enemy's uniform to the person underneath. Those choices add up. They change things. It's too slow, Thrace said, shaking his head. We need dramatic action. A reminder of what's at stake. You want dramatic action? Lyrian's voice was hard now. Fine, look at me, Ambassador. Really, look at me. Thrace turned his full attention to her. Lyrian pulled out Jake's old unit patch, holding it up so Thrace could see. I was 8 years old when the war took my parents. A human soldier saved me when he had every reason to leave me to die. He gave me this patch and told me to stay strong. I carried it through refugee camps, through foster homes, through every dark moment when I wanted to give up. This piece of cloth from a human soldier's uniform gave a silvery child hope, when hope seemed impossible. Lyrian's voice was shaking but strong. You want to honor your children's memory? Then work for a future where no more children have to carry patches like this because soldiers had to save them from wars. Build something instead of destroying everything. Thrace stared at her, and for a moment Jake saw the mask crack, saw the grief and pain underneath the anger. But then Thrace's expression hardened again. I'm sorry, but my mind is made up. He reached for the device's activation panel. Jake moved on instinct, drawing his weapon. Don't make me shoot you. You won't, Thrace said calmly. Shooting me in front of my people would destroy exactly the kind of trust you're talking about. You'd become the enemy I've always said humans are. He was right, and they both knew it. Jake couldn't shoot an unarmed diplomat, even one attempting sabotage. The political fallout would be catastrophic, but Lyrian could. She moved faster than Jake thought possible, crossing the distance to Thrace and grabbing his wrist before he could activate the device. For a moment, they struggled. Then Lyrian did something Jake didn't expect. She didn't fight Thrace. She embraced him. I know your pain, she said softly, speaking Sylvari now. Jake's translator earpiece rendered her words. I live with it every day. The empty spaces where my parents should be. The memories that hurt to remember but hurt worse to forget. I know what it feels like to want the universe to hurt as much as you do. Thrace's hands were shaking. The device slipped from his grip, falling to the floor with a clatter. Lyrian held him as he began to sob, years of grief finally breaking through the wall of anger he'd built. Security moved in carefully, securing the device and placing Thrace under arrest. He didn't resist. All the fight had drained out of him, leaving only a broken man who'd lost too much and nearly destroyed everything trying to make that loss mean something. The rest of the night was chaos. The human extremists working with Thrace were identified and arrested before they could execute their part of the plan. Statements had to be made. Reports had to be filed. Both governments had to be notified that elements within their own ranks had tried to sabotage peace. Jake found Lyrian near dawn, sitting alone on the same observation deck where they'd talked before. She looked exhausted, staring out at the stars with unfocused eyes. "You okay?" he asked, sitting beside her. "I don't know," she admitted. "Thrace is someone I respected. Someone who lost everything just like I did. I could have become him. If things had gone differently, if I hadn't met you, maybe I would have chosen his path instead of mine. But you didn't," Jake said. "You chose hope. That's what makes you different. Is it, though?" Lyrian asked quietly. "Or did I just get lucky? Lucky that you saved me. Lucky that kind people took me in. Lucky that I had reasons to believe peace was possible." Thrace didn't get lucky. He got more pain and more loss and no reason to believe anything could be better. Jake thought about that. Maybe you're right. Maybe choice and luck aren't as separate as we like to think. But you still chose what to do with your luck. You could have been bitter despite the kindness shown to you. You could have used your position to seek revenge. Instead, you used everything you experienced, good and bad, to try making things better. "I almost failed tonight," Lyrian said. "If I hadn't stopped Thrace, if his plan had worked, this peace would be over. Everything we've been working toward would be destroyed. But you did stop him," Jake said firmly. "Not with violence. Not with force. With compassion. You saw his pain and met it with your own. You reminded him that he wasn't alone in his grief. That's the most human thing you could have done." Lyrian looked at him. "The most human thing?" "Yeah," Jake said. "Humans have done terrible things in our history. We've been cruel and violent and destructive, but we've also done something else. We've chosen again and again to reach across divides and find common ground, to see suffering and try to ease it, to build connections even when it's easier to build walls. That's what makes us human. Not our weapons or our technology, but our stubborn refusal to give up on each other. That's what you did for me," Lyrian said softly. "You reached across the divide of war and saved an enemy child. You gave me proof that connection was possible. And you've spent 12 years proving I was right to believe in that possibility," Jake replied. "You've built your entire life around the idea that different peoples can understand each other. That peace is worth fighting for. That's not luck, Lyrian. That's courage." They sat in silence for a while, watching the station slowly rotate until the blue-green planet came into view again. Somewhere on that planet, people who'd never fought in the war were living peaceful lives. Children growing up without fear. That was what tonight had been about. Protecting that peace so more people could live without war's shadow. "The summit will continue," Lyrian said eventually. "Both governments have issued statements condemning the extremists. The vote on mutual defense pacts will proceed as scheduled." "Will it pass?" Jake asked. "I think so." Ironically, Thrace's attempted sabotage might have helped. It reminded everyone why we need these pacts, why we need to work together. Nothing unites people like a common threat, even if that threat comes from within. The next morning, the vote passed by a significant margin. Human and silvery representatives stood together and signed agreements that would bind their peoples in common defense. It wasn't perfect. There would still be disagreements and conflicts, but it was a foundation to build on. Jake and Lyrian stood at the back of the chamber during the signing ceremony, watching history being made. After it was over, they walked